to make this there we go. We'd love to make this as interactive and useful as possible. So if you please take a moment and introduce yourselves in the chat, your name, organization, role. We'd also love it if you'd share one question that's top of mind for you, something that you hope we'll tackle today. And I'll do my best to weave those questions into the presentation where relevant, and we'll be sure to revisit any remaining ones during our discussion at the end. And I will pause, throughout the presentation for us to have a conversation. And of course, feel free to jump in while I'm talking for any questions for clarification or any points you would like to make. I really do hope that this can be as interactive as possible. Great. All right. Before we dive into the research, I want to give you a quick roadmap of where we're headed. First, I'll walk through some of our latest research and key findings. Um, these publications help us better understand where higher education is creating economic opportunity and where barriers continue to prevent equitable access to that opportunity. Then I'll shift to how we're translating those findings into action through policy advocacy, implementation support, and systems level partnerships. For us, research is most powerful when it directly informs real world change. And after that, I'll share what's ahead, including major upcoming research, our Higher Ed Rise initiative, and broader efforts to shape California's next chapter in higher education and workforce policy. And finally, we'll have time for a discussion. And I'd love to return to the questions that you're sharing in the chat right now and explore what you're thinking about, opportunities you see, gaps you see for our state. Um, Before I jump in, want to ground us in the broader narratives that our work advances, that largely college continues to create economic opportunity, but access to that remains uneven, and California has to modernize our systems to better support today's learners. Okay. Our recent research. So our recent research strengthens the evidence base for this narrative. So today I'll discuss our Degrees of Value series, which explores how college ROI varies across populations and regions. Um, our Listening to Learners series, which examines students' experience with career preparation and guidance, and want to give huge kudos to College Futures Foundation and Strata Education Foundation for your partnership in both of those. Um, and then Untapped Opportunity Report, which builds on our past adult learners research. And this one focuses specifically on parents of young children in the Bay Area. And thank you to Tipping Point for your partnership on that. Okay, first, Degrees of Value, which we published, as I mentioned, in partnership with College Futures Foundation and Strata Education Foundation. This research examines how the economic return on college varies across California, where higher education is delivering opportunity and where structural barriers continue to limit it. So far, we've published two briefs, one that explores differences by race, ethnicity, and sex, and another one that looks at variation across California's regions. Both briefs also compare the ROI of bachelor's degrees with the ROI of associate's degrees. And to note, to be clear, the value of college has many other dimensions like learning new skills, building one's networks, gaining self-confidence. And in a forthcoming third brief in this series, a qualitative study, we'll dig deeper into sort of the multidimensional aspects of ROI. More on that later. Okay, so what do we mean by ROI? And I know there's a lot of studies that look at value and ROI in different ways, and I will flag that. Well, we can share in chat, Jeremy, if you could share in chat. There's an ROI metrics matrix we put together that helps sort of summarize some of the major publications that look at different value measures. Um, for our research, we defined it's the economic premium of a college degree minus its costs. So a college graduate has a positive ROI if they earn enough above a typical high school graduate in 10 years to exceed the cost of attending college. Um, so it's a pretty straightforward metric, like, are you economically better off after 10 years? Um, so before I do the big reveal of what we found, I'm curious, what do those of you in the room think the ROI is for a bachelor's degree and associate's degree? So we're going to put a poll up. Mark, what you think is, what percent of Californians achieve a positive ROI after earning their bachelor's degree, and what percent achieve a positive ROI after completing their associate's degree? So folks have the poll should have popped up by now. Two questions. All right. Okay, so almost everyone, most have participated now. I'm going to end the poll in 3 seconds as your last chance to get your votes in. Okay, I'm sharing the results. Okay, so as you can see from the results, big spread on bachelor's degree in the room. So some of you as low as 50% up to 89%. And then looking at associate's degree holders, lower percent or estimates of the ROI from under 50% to up to 79%. Um, so I will say you guys are pretty close, largely on the bachelor's degree and a little lower on the associate's degree. So here's what we found. Um, we found at a high level that research, confirms that college continues to deliver strong economic value for most Californians, and that 78% of bachelor's holders and 62% of associate's degree holders see a positive ROI. Um, and we think this is especially important amid the growing skepticism about the value of higher ed, but it's not the full story. So when we look more closely, we find that these returns differ widely among region, race, ethnicity, sex, degree type, as flagged above. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about the results for bachelor's degree holders, and I'm happy to go over the associate's degree data in more depth later if folks are interested. And obviously, you could jump into the reports and dig into them. Okay. So our first brief found ROI differences by race, ethnicity, and sex. So looking at the data on bachelor's holders' ROI, white and Asian graduates are more likely to see a positive return than Latinx and Black graduates. So for white and Asian, between 79 to 82, Latinx and Black 73 to 77. Men and women experience similar overall rates of return, but racial and ethnic gaps persist within both groups. And when we looked at the associate's degree holders, the variation is more pronounced and complex. So what we see is that these findings really reinforce that economic outcomes are shaped not just by educational attainment itself, but also by broader labor market inequities and structural barriers. And so this is why a focus on equity-focused higher education and workforce policy and practice really, really matters. Not surprisingly, geography also plays a major role in shaping outcomes. So again, looking at bachelor's degree holders, we see positive ROI rates from 70% in the Inland Empire to 84% in the Bay Area. And to note, we didn't have enough data to estimate ROI for two regions. Those are the ones that are in gray. Um, You'll also see that having a bachelor's degree pays off most often in our urban coastal regions compared to rural inland regions. And these are also the state's economic hubs. So getting a bachelor's degree in this areas that have a strong economy pays off more. Um, and when we looked at associate's degree, again, the variation is much wider. So when we think about improving college attainment rate, it has to be um, aligned with, connected to what's happening in that region's economy around how are individuals thinking about what does higher ed get me? And then we think about improving the outcomes for higher ed. We also have to think about what does the economy look like in which people are living. And so while a bachelor's degree, bachelor's and associate's degree here, so the bachelor's degree pays off more often than an associate's degree in every region. The size of this gap very significantly. So you'll see here the little teal dots are for associate's degree, the yellow dots for bachelor's. In some regions, like the Inland Empire and Central Coast, a bachelor's degree's advantage is modest. By contrast, in other parts of the state, as you can see, Upper Sacramento Valley, the Bay Area, the gap is substantially wider. And these findings reinforce that higher education outcomes are deeply connected to regional labor markets and economic conditions, again, underscoring the importance of stronger regional coordination between colleges, employers, and workforce systems, and the critical role that philanthropy can play in driving that systems change. Beyond the research itself, these findings have strengthened California Competes' role in statewide and national conversations about higher education's value and economic mobility, and really serving to provide rigorous research to drive, I think, better, smarter, more action-oriented conversations. So it helps to affirm that higher education does pay off. It does affirm that there are real equity concerns that we need to be paying attention to. Um, and it's helped, I think, policymakers, higher ed leaders turn more to research to really understand and be able to drive data-based decisions in their strategies. Um, so, for example, after the publication of the first brief, EdSource invited Cal Competes to join their national roundtable centered around the question, is college worth it? They also drew inspiration from the series' name. So using this evidence, we were able to shift the discussion from whether college matters to how higher ed systems can ensure it works better for more learners. And we've continued to drive this narrative in legislative conversations, statewide and national speaking engagements, media partnerships, etc. So how do we improve ROI? At a high level, there are two levers. One, we can increase graduates' earnings, and two, we can decrease students' college costs. The second set of publications I want to discuss today are Listening to Learners briefs, focuses on this first strategy and increasing graduates' earnings. And I'm happy to talk about decreasing college students' costs too. Okay, so one critical opportunity is thinking about how do we improve graduates' earnings by strengthening their career preparation. So higher ed institutions themselves play a central role in helping students make this transition from higher ed to work by ensuring they receive the guidance, support, training to create a smooth pathway. And I want to flag that I know many higher institutions may bristle at like the workforce development function or the the career training or vocational function of higher ed. Um, and I understand that. The thing that I think really helps higher ed institutions and the folks that we're working with that may at first sort of be resistant to that responsibility is to remind them that today's students are very different. They're often first generation college students coming from low income families. I think about like when I myself went to college, I didn't know anyone that had graduated from college. So when I finished college, I didn't know what I was supposed to do with a college degree. And I literally went and worked on Wall Street because I received an email that said, hey, what do you do with a degree in math? Go work on Wall Street. I didn't know what Wall Street was. It was my first time ever on a plane. But it was like I just got this random email. And so I think that's when I think about like the equity imperative, the moral imperative for higher institutions is you can stay resistant to this, but what you're doing is you're leaving behind first generation college students who you've worked so hard to recruit and educate. But now you have to recognize that when I went home for Thanksgiving, I didn't have my parents or aunts and uncles to say, Sujin, get an internship. Sujin, here's like start applying for jobs. Here's what you could do with the degree in math, or here's who you talk to. I didn't know how to navigate any of this. So if higher institutions don't do it, we're leaving students on their own. So it's not just like you need to be a workforce development entity, which I do think they should recognize that they are. But it really is sort of an equity and moral imperative. So back to the research. So for the series of these three briefs, which we did leveraging Shaw Education Foundation's amazing surveying, and in partnership with College Futures, we analyzed their survey data from over 5,000 California college students and recent graduates to understand their experiences with career guidance, work-based learning, and early career outcomes. And those are the three briefs: one on career guidance, one on work-based learning, one on early career outcomes. And so our research finds that many students face barriers to the guidance and preparation they need to succeed in the workforce. So let's dig in a little. So one major finding was on timing. So students were asked, when do you receive career information? And they reported that most do eventually receive career information while enrolled, but often after their first year. And this timing matters because the first year is when students are making critical decisions about majors, pathways, and career direction. And we know the longer that students spend in college, the more expensive it is, both in like direct costs of paying for college, but also the opportunity cost that they're not, working a professional career. Not in addition to perhaps the frustration of not knowing and getting the guidance that you want and need early on. So providing students with earlier, clear career information can support more informed decision making and more timely and affordable completion. We are working with a cohort of colleges in LA, and one thing that we've been working with them on is how do you provide information early to college students, ideally even before they even matriculate. Because you're already engaging with students or potential students before they come to your campuses. So how do they engage students even at that point? Right. We also found that students who participate in internships report stronger early career outcomes. Yet many students never access these opportunities. So when the survey asked students like, why don't you do an internship? They report uncertainty about finding opportunities as a top barrier to participation, um, and also their course load being too heavy. And these are really solvable systems challenges. So back to the work I mentioned we're doing in LA, is what these colleges are now doing to work together around is how do they integrate work-based learning into programs of study? So it's not put on students to have to figure it out. What is a good internship program or work-based learning opportunity? How do I secure it? And how do I work it into my heavy course load? And I'm likely already working. And I will say thank you to ECMC Foundation for your support of that, and also to Broad. Um, all right, so we also, when we look at early career outcomes, we see that less than half of recent graduates are highly satisfied with their first job and their career progress. And so what we see is together these findings reinforce that career readiness cannot be treated as sort of an optional add-on, that students navigate their way to a career center at the edge of campus. It really has to become a core part of how institutions design the student experience. And this is, I think, important to like both obviously the ROI that students um, get, but also to the strength of our regional and local economies and our communities. And there's so much, obviously, more good work we can do. This does feel like a low-hanging fruit around how do we make this sort of a campus-wide responsibility. So as I mentioned, we've been working to put these findings into practice through our regional partnership in Central LA. I think they'd love, this is one of my favorite pictures that someone captured is on the right here is me with the three college presidents. It's um, President Curry at Compton, President Jordan at West LA, and President Timms at El Camino. And what's really fun about this picture, I think, is this was a 6-hour retreat with them and like their key leaders on their team. And one of the key leaders said, like, how did you get them to spend this much time on this issue? And it was, this is something that they're really passionate about, is they really care about students when they leave their colleges land good jobs. And it's something they're grappling with and they're willing to put the work into. Um, so it was a really, I feel like, wonderful moment that like the commitment for both the leadership teams and the executive leadership was really visible and present. Um, Also on the left, great Inside Higher Ed. They've been great partners, I feel like, around covering the research we've been putting out, but really helping to elevate the understandings and the important roles that higher ed have in supporting students' transitions to good jobs and how it has to be integrated into how higher ed functions every day. Um, Great. All right, and the third study I want to talk about is about the Californians who aren't enrolling in for the first place. So one thing that we really care about CalCompetes are not only just our current students, but frankly, the millions of Californians who could and should be college students. But our institutions, our systems are not designed to make access feasible. Um, so our third publication, Untapped Opportunities, Strengthening College Pathways for Bay Area Parents of Young Children. I know this is a mouthful. This builds on our earlier Untapped Opportunity work that examines California adults without degrees, which I know many foundations on this call, including College Futures, supported back in 2021. And one finding from that research stood out. Many adults without degrees were parents. Most, I think 57% of Californians without degrees had dependent children. And that realization really helped to, I feel like, galvanize and ignite um, our focus on student parents and family serving institutions. So people talk about enrollment challenges and serving adults. They've got to think about how do we serve those with children. So this new report takes a deeper look specifically at Bay Area parents of young children. So those are raising children under the age of 3. And so most of our findings focus on this population. There's over 87,000 of them in the Bay Area. And I'm simply going to refer to them as parents without degrees, um, just for ease of prose. So why did we focus on this population? The Bay Area is important because while the region's high cost of raising a family creates challenges, its dense network of public colleges and strong labor market offer multi-generational opportunity if folks could tap into it. Um, Also, children under 3 are really important because those early years are a critical stage of children's lives and development, and supporting these parents to and through college strengthens not just our regional economy, but it promotes family stability at a time when it really matters. Um, and also a flag, it's also from our deep partnership with Tipping Point community and thinking about how do we better serve this really critical population. And I am excited because I feel like this work is part of Tipping Point's early childhood portfolio, but the recognition that for young children to thrive, the parents need to thrive and that higher ed, like those parents deserve access to college. Um, so I am excited about that perspective too. Okay, so what did we learn? And I will say this very much focuses on Bay Area parent faculty degrees. But in our actual report, if you go through it, we do include replication links. So you could click on those links and you can change the filters. So if you wanted to do Inland Empire, if you wanted to do a different age group for children, if you want to do the state, the nation, whatever you want, it's very easy to change the analysis. But I do think it's really important that we understand not just state or national, but also our local regional communities too. So you could also go by county, city, whatever geographic sort of um, area you would like. Okay, so what do we find for this group to give you a sense of what can be done elsewhere too? All right, so who are these parents? They're disproportionately Black, 8% versus 6% of all Bay Area adults, and Latinx, 45% versus 22%. So meeting this population's needs is an equity, a racial justice imperative. They're older than current undergraduates, so 33 versus 22. So they're at an age where they could bring work experience and they're young enough for their families to enjoy decades of earnings from a degree. Um, Also, 2/3 are raising multiple children, and the vast majority of their children, 91%, are under 13. So young enough to require childcare. And this points to, frankly, childcare as being a critical need for this population. So these findings reinforce that today's learners will need to balance work, caregiving, and education simultaneously. So supporting efforts to design systems for their realities is central to California's future economic mobility goals. So looking also at like the economic disparities, they're striking. So in the Bay Area, parents without degrees earn about 33,800 annually compared to 106,000 for parents with degrees. This is the median. Relatedly, 21% of parents without degrees earning living wage compared to 71% for parents with degrees. And so while, obviously a degree alone does not guarantee economic mobility, as we saw in the ROI work, these findings do highlight the potential transformative power of higher education for families across generations. Um, and one interesting thing I wanted to flag too is that nearly half, 48%, have already completed some college. They took that first step. So they're closer to graduation, the first-time students, and many could re-enroll and complete with the right supports. I also want to note we have to understand why did students start and leave. We do have research on this, but for higher ed institutions, one thing we say is before you start marketing towards, student parents or adult learners, you have to make sure institutions are ready for them. You can't just enroll or re-enroll students who left. Students leave for a reason. You've got to make sure you understand and change your institutions and the support so that they can be successful. But one finding stood out above all others. Over 100,000 barrier parents want to enroll in college, but cite childcare as a barrier. And I will note this data includes parents of all dependent children of all ages. So that's a problem. I doubt it's specific to the Bay Area. And we've long heard about the importance of childcare from student parents. Like one of the California Alliance of Student Parents that we co-lead with our partners at Trust West, one of our advisory committee members, Jordan Calley, who wrote a blog with us last year and then also spoke at Tipping Point Breakfast last December, who was amazing. I will send out the link to that, her speech. It's so great. But talks about sort of the importance of childcare and how that was a game changer for her to be able to go to college. Um, and so it's in many ways unsurprising that this is the same barrier that prevents many parents from going to college in the first place. Um, so all in all, when we look at these findings, it points to the huge potential of parents without degrees, as well as to the imperative to address their childcare needs in order to unlock it. So if California wants to improve degree attainment and economic mobility, addressing caregiving barriers and the needs for parenting students is must be part of the solution. Um, Great. And then just to as I know the other sections to talk about how the research has been influencing these conversations. So we've been able to take this research on a very specific population and make it widely relevant to even a national audience. And we've used it to clarify public understanding of today's current and prospective students and their needs. I think when we first really started to drive conversations around student parents, maybe right before the pandemic or at the beginning of the pandemic, what we heard often was like, this is so niche. And I remember even talking with Cara Dukakis at Tipping Point Community about this, about this feeling that student parents are just this niche population. And I think what we're seeing is a wider recognition that actually parents are like the typical adult in much of our state. Um, and in many ways, uh, representative of who should be in college. Um, so we've been working really hard to highlight this untapped opportunity and what they represent for communities or institutions in the state. And then filling in critical details on how to engage them. So it's not enough to say okay, I get it. Let's target some student parents to enroll at our college, but how do we effectively do that? So I want to highlight on the right here on this slide, for example, is the California Alliance for Student Parent Success. Recently launched our Student Parent Resource Hub, which is, we'll also drop a link in for that or follow up with that. And thank you to ECNC Foundation and Imaginable Futures for your support of this. It's a tool that centralizes student parent resources and supports childcare across California's public institutions. So one of its main intended uses is a decision-making tool for prospective students so they can compare schools and find the one that's right for their family. If they're seeking childcare, if they're seeking, support like a family resource center, et cetera, they can decide, what they're looking for, or even go to this tool and sort of see what is this world of opportunities or resources available to a student parent. Because for many prospective students, who haven't engaged or haven't been well engaged by higher ed, you don't know what the resources are that are there designed to support you. And I've heard that from so many students that they were literally in their second semester in college and learned about financial aid, or learned that there was a childcare center, or learned about, a basic needs center or food pantry, or they heard about them after they graduated. And higher institutions are working so hard to create and provide these services. So how do we make sure that students know that they're there and access them and make good decisions? So we built this tool, which just launched. So we welcome your input and feedback. We hope to sort of keep updating it. Um, so in sum, the sort of through line across the three buckets of research that I shared with you is, higher ed continues to create significant economic value for individuals in our state. Access is uneven, and stronger outcomes require systems to intentionally design around today's learners. Um, cool. I'm gonna take a moment and pause there because I've been talking a lot. And I'm curious, like, is there anything from the research findings I've shared that surprised you or particularly resonated? Um, or any questions you have that you want me to elaborate on or revisit? Feel free to just unmute and jump in, or if you want to type in the chat, whatever your preference is.
Hi, Sujin. This is Brian Rivas from Gates.
Hey, Brian.
Uh, Thanks. Enjoyed your presentation. I just wondered about the ROI. What were the variances among the courses of study? I frankly get a lot of questions and pushback from skeptics that a degree in social science really isn't valuable nowadays. So I was just curious whether you found any variance or what was the variance.
Yeah, so our analysis does not look at programs of study, but we can point you to really good work that College Futures is supporting that Mike Itzkowitz is doing through Higher Education Advisors that looks at programs of study. And I think they've done bachelor's degrees, associate's degrees, and he just put out one that's focused on certificates. Um, and then we also, I will put in the chat the metrics matrix that links a number of sort of major different sort of like ROI metrics, and you can sort of see which one does what, and then the differences between sort of how they estimate the ROI.
So, Jen, I just really want to. This is Ruth Watkins from Strata. I really want to commend you on the work that you're doing, and particularly that roll up your sleeves hard work with those three community college presidents and a day spent together and probably many, many, many hours both before and after. For all of us that are working to enhance career outcomes through this work, it's not research and data without a purpose. It is we want to apply it, use it, and make it easy for everyone who's committed to this to use it. What lessons would you convey to the rest of us? What kind of work should we be doing? Where should we be investing? For all of the fellow funders out there that are thinking about, okay, the end of the line is not completion alone, it's completion for what? And ensuring that people really see a strong link between their education and their career opportunity and economic mobility. What ought we invest in? What should we do? Where are the actions that will help move this to scale?
Oh, nice, easy question, Ruth. I mean, obviously, I think like the things that California Competes are focused on are the things that we think are like the highest impact activities. I do think like there's a lot more research that can be done, and I will talk in a little bit about the Higher Ed Rise work that we are supporting that really focuses on the breadth of critical research questions that our state needs to answer to be able to move the needle. A lot of which are issues that Cal Competes, it's not our sort of focus, but we think is really, really important. Um, I also think, as you flag, this connection between like research and systems change and like what like the actions on campus, right, are really important, and the role of campus leadership all the way, down to the person, and down to makes it sound like a lower level, but like the people working with students. Um, so for example, the finding around why aren't students doing internships from the Strata survey, course load and can't find them. Those when we saw that was like, oh, the obvious thing is like integrate it into your programs of study. And so if you're a president and you read this, we're like, okay, guys, let's do this. And they had flagged early on. We've been working with these colleges for like I think maybe like 6 years now, intensively. They had flagged a number of years ago that, engaging employers was a big priority from them from like day one. And then it really shifted to like, okay, engaging employers to what end? And then work-based learning was a priority for them. And so when we saw this research, we sort of had a clear direction. So now these campuses they're also in the same sort of geographic area. So they knew that they share an economy. And they knew that they didn't want to approach employers one by one, even if they knew who were the employers that they were supposed to approach. So it's like, how do we work together so we're not fighting over students or employer relationships or connections with the county or our local workforce development board um, to design something together. So now they're looking to design a shared work-based learning opportunity. They've picked healthcare. Um, and it's specifically actually focused on this is like, I mean, these institutions are so phenomenal. It's specifically focused on students who don't get into the RN nursing program. There's huge demand in our state for these RN, these associate's degree RN programs, and so many students don't get in. So how do they connect them to good paying jobs in the healthcare fields that have tight connections to employers? So that's what they're really digging into. And I think it takes this like, the research that really helps us understand the barriers to getting students what we know will help them. The executive, the presidents, that leadership that will sort of set that as a goal and show their team that like they're willing to roll up their sleeves and do what it takes to get it done, but also engaging the folks that are working deeply with students to know the heartbreak, the frustration, the commitment students have put towards getting into these associate's degree RN programs that they need to serve, right? Otherwise, they could have just picked, hey, this employer is great, let's just do this for them. But these institutions really focused on student needs and as letting that drive it. So I think it's this like being able to connect, from research down to the campuses and then back up to policy. And thinking about what are the policy structures that allow it so that not just these campuses who have the leaders that want to do this work, but also campuses for whom the leaders might have some other priority that this system can work for them without them having to, spend, one day a quarter in this work group.
I think it's just a stellar example that you just gave, Sujin. And hopefully, as the link goes back up to policy, maybe there is a way that it helps unlock additional slots and capacity in nursing programs in the region because that is a very common, there's enormous employer demand and lots of talented people that want to pursue that pathway, and we don't have enough slots in those programs. So, what's the investment or some shared investment that could actually happen there? So, that's a great example as well. Thank you.
And I should also flag there's also related to this work in LA, they're also doing another specific sort of like intersegmental cross-sector effort around nursing, being co-led by Compton College President Curry, and then Nathan Evans in the CSU Chancellor's Office, but includes private institutions, hospitals, and other colleges, really focused again on this like nursing. But I feel like this has really deepened, broadened the thinking around connections between higher ed, employers, and serving a really important community need. Any other thoughts or
Hi,
reflections?
Sujan.
Hey.
Sarah Reed from Tipping Point. I wanted to circle back to the ROI report again. And that's one that actually we've shared a lot internally because of the focus on the Bay Area. And had a follow-up question around the data. And I think if I remember correctly, the data is from surveys that were from a few years ago. And I think on a lot of our minds is just the nature of the world being really different today. And curious for your thoughts on that, other reactions or questions you've gotten around like how relevant is this in the age of AI and this current federal government? And yeah, and your thoughts there.
Yeah, great question. So the data are from our partners at Strata. And I will say the Strata does the national scan and then has been so great and doing like when they're doing surveying, sort of oversampling California, being partners around, sharing the survey questions so we can have input. This was using census data, the American Community Survey data, and I forget if it's the 3 or 5 year. So it's population level data. And then it's over multiple years. So every year it changes, by a third or a fifth. I forget if it's a 3 or 5 year. So I don't think it would shift dramatically for that reason. Um, the question around AI is an important one. And as I'm saying this, I'm working through. I think the only ways in which it would probably like shift hugely dramatically is if people with an associate's degree or a bachelor's degree are all of a sudden making dramatically less and that's showing up in the census data, or people or the cost of college are going up dramatically. And I don't see that really happening. Um, or people without a degree are all of a sudden earning a ton more. I don't see that happening. I could see an environment in the Bay Area where people with bachelor's degrees or associate's degrees are now unemployed, or underemployed and earning significantly less. And one could say, people are looking at sort of I think very cool. I just posted on LinkedIn, maybe we could share this too. Research around the impact of AI on the labor market. And it looks like there is a disproportionate impact on early career AI exposed jobs. Um, but also there was a recent study that came out that it looks like return to work may have actually had a really big impact. Like, could some of these AI impacts be capturing a return to work labor market impact? All this to say, I don't anticipate like a huge change, but I don't know. Dave, I saw you. I don't know if you want to jump in.
Oh, Sujin, you're so great. As we, the really what we see is sometimes the floor. It's where the floor is for high school educated individuals, and the premium comes with where you are in that state, in that geography, with an associate or a bachelor's degree. So even though more women will get a positive ROI, it's in part, and they're still earning less than men because it's the floor for the high school educated women is lower, and so that gap that gives them the premium is significantly greater. So it's really, as you point out, really, and as Sujin is commenting, very important to understand the context of what we're looking at and where we're comparing. I think the single biggest predictor as you look at this 10-year, kind of in 10 years, can you pay it off and positive ROI, is a college level job. So not being underemployed. And essentially in the lowest cost state, if you're earning $33,000 a year annually, you can hit that positive ROI. In the highest cost states, if you make $55,000 a year annually, you would break off. So we're really talking about the people in that band between $33,000, $55,000 in income, and in the state and the economy where they are. And then you have to think about the cost of living in the Bay Area, and that premium trade-off. So happy to, as I know Sujin is, follow up and think about specific things, in part so we can package data and get it back and out and report on it in ways that are most helpful to everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Yeah, and we saw the CPL report in our inbox today, so that'll be an interesting resource as well. And Cara has a
Yeah, I'm just gonna jump in here to take advantage of the fact that we're not on mute. So I had a question, unsurprisingly, about sort of a follow-on to the student parents report, which thank you again. Super excited about that. And just a question about the C Campus program, the federal C Campus program, which I know like sort of was recently and maybe surprisingly, like they issued not an RFP, a NOFA, whatever, for FY26. And then it's sort of up in the air based on what Congress is going to do for FY27. But just curious about, what your sense is of how all of the student parent work that you all have championed and the Alliance as well, could potentially benefit, in California from that.
From continued C campus funding.
Yeah, and like, is that a real kind of like opportunity, like, in California, to sort of further the work that you all have been doing?
Yeah, that's a of course I feel like a good and surprisingly tough question. Um, I think the C campus funding is important in that it gets institutions to think about like childcare on their campus. Like if you see this like pot of federal funding and what is this? Why is it important? Um, and gets it moving. My general preference in the way that we would, if I could, be queen for a day of how we support childcare is just to give cash to parents and let them, you know, handle their childcare as need be, because so many parents find like transportation to campus expensive, and they're not there as frequently as they would need childcare. So it also like lots of families prefer to have childcare close to their home or to their work, places that they're going to every day. That said, a lot of student parents, like that is a deeper connection for them to the campus, and to integrate into the campus community. You also like have assurances that it's high quality. I mean, knock on wood. Um, we also see that like a lot of campus childcare centers don't actually serve the students' children. It's more faculty and staff. So it's kind of, I feel like it's kind of complicated, like everything. Um, but that said, like, I think it's a great program. I think it should continue. We definitely want it to continue. We want more institutions to take advantage of it. And we would like to see students prioritized, for those childcare spots, and also recognize that for many students, campus childcare isn't the best solution for them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, this is happening in, I think, 4 counties, in California and mostly in the Bay Area, but like there are these ballot initiatives, in San Francisco, in Alameda County, in Napa, and one that's going to be on the ballot in, November, I think, hopefully, that, are providing a designated funding stream for childcare and childcare accessibility. So yeah, potentially building that in, building student parents in as a priority, is potentially a possibility there too. But I mean, and that will be the wave of the future, unfortunately, until we get the state to, really up their game here.
I can jump in. This is Robert Medina with Sobrado Philanthropies. Hi, Cara. Good to see you. It's been a little while. I had a similar reflection as you did, and I dropped it in the chat because it struck me with the student parent research findings. To your point, Cara, I mean, we spent a lot of time in the early childhood Bay Area Funders Collaborative reflecting on the childcare landscape, and I'm also um, sitting with the fact that we're all kind of in siloed conversations just because of the nature of how our systems are built. So it makes me wonder about opportunities for cross pollination between the childcare advocates, Cara, that you and I have kind of engaged around and talked through with some of the higher education experts and folks, like you all, Sujin and team, to really think about what are the opportunities for student parents on the childcare front, because I know there are a lot of momentum on, to your point, Cara, that the ballot initiatives. We've been talking to the San Mateo and Santa Clara folks around some of the campaigns that are local to those communities. So, but I haven't heard student parents come up as explicitly as they are coming up here. So I wonder whether that might be an opening for future conversation.
I would love to learn more, and that was one of the, goals of the Student Parent Alliance was to bring together, these different constituencies that are focused on, children and, mobility for their parents, who don't often get to talk. So I will follow up with both of you and see if we can. I'm very curious too about these efforts, you mentioned. And then I see Kowena. Am I saying your name right? Kowena?
Yes, it's
Okay.
Selena. Thank you. And thank you for the presentation, really valuable data. And my question is, when you're looking at the data, for example, when you were talking about the uncertainty about finding internships or satisfaction with first job, or even in the conversation around parenting students, was any of the data disaggregated by age? Like, do we know how many participants are, say, under 25 years old? And do you see any nuance that should be considered for younger students? Possibly, like, is there a variation for students that are coming straight out of high school into a higher education institution versus those who may have possibly had some life experience, work experience, and are coming back to higher ed?
That's a great question. I cannot remember. I know we did look at the Strata data does have a lot of demographic information. I forget which disaggregations we had probed, but I can follow up with you. And I could see that be, I mean, like so I mentioned we're doing our third brief on this degrees of value series, the ROI, that's the more qualitative piece. And like we're currently reviewing it. It's very fresh in my mind, but in thinking about, our conversations with some of like our program officers who are supporting college access programs and hearing from them that they're working to integrate internship components for students who are more traditional college students and then thinking about this ROI piece that is focused on comebackers and their perspective on like 2 years after they finish now, like their perspective on how things have gone and what the degree has gotten them. Many of them, were in professional workplaces and stayed there. But so it's sort of less so around the work-based learning piece, but it's about the sort of like professional freedom. Um, that now they actually have the degree that they're supposed to have for that role, or they also feel like now I can leave this job if I want to, and opens up opportunities. So, as you're saying this, I'm thinking about like the very different ways in which work applies for like a young student versus an older student. Yeah, I will follow up with you. That's a good question. I know, Dave, I don't know if you guys looked into that or if you know.
No, it's such a good point. We've looked at race, ethnicity, gender, field of study, but we haven't done that age split, and it's really and parent status both. So, thank you. Uh, we'll cite you when we release updated data.
Great. Any other questions? I think we have time for one more. I will not go back into the presentation, but we will share the slides in case anyone is interested in seeing what was coming next. All right, if not, I will do a quick then just like what we're working on it because I know I've hinted at Higher Ed Rise. I think some of you have heard about this already, but I can give sort of an update of what's going on with that work. So Higher Ed Rise is short for Higher Education Research Informing Solutions for Excellence. And it's a large effort focused on how do we get rigorous answers to some of the key questions that California higher ed leaders and policymakers need to understand better to do better. So working with an advisory committee made up of a legislative leader, Monica Henestroza, a data leader, Marianne Bates, who leads the Critical Career Data System. And I should say Monica is in the Assembly Speaker's House and has been, I feel like, decades focused on legislative and higher ed policy in California. Marlena Sessions, who leads a workforce development board in Silicon Valley and had national and other state roles in workforce development, and McCall Kurlander, who is, one of California's amazing scholars around higher ed, identifying the key research questions, identifying the best researchers to dig in. And so now we have 12 researchers who are commissioned to do work. We're working with a couple more in the process to add a couple more on. This summer, we'll be digging into convening all of the researchers together to share their preliminary research methods, to get feedback and input, and then doing a similar thing once they have preliminary findings. we'll be connecting with advocates to also ensure that they take the next step once the research is released, to then take that to drive action, whether it's legislative, regulatory, campus by campus. So really, really excited about that work and happy to share if anyone wants like the specific research questions or researchers, happy to chat more about that. And I thank you. I know many of you have chatted with me about things that you're interested in. And thank you, College Futures and Haas Junior, for your support of this. Also seeking more funding support if you're interested. Also will flag I think there's a question around the connection of like how what California is doing can influence what's happening nationally. This has been a more strategic direction of California competes in our work. So we have the privilege, I feel like, of working in a state that is very aligned around values and serving students. So thinking about how we've been able to move efforts here and helping other states understand our strategies and just having a proof of concept that other states could then leverage. Whether it's, the student parent research, we put out an almanac, the one that we just showed around untapped opportunity, around legislation, around the design of our Student Parents Alliance, or forthcoming, or our just launched, I should say, alliance focused on streamlining benefits access, or other advocacy work like around enhanced wage data. And thank you to Strata for your support and deep partnership around that, and hoping to influence like federal work. Hopefully we'll hear, that will come out that will be influenced by what we're doing here and other work happening across the country. But also like workforce Pell implementation, that California can implement this in a way that really does protect students and also motivates stronger connections to those who wouldn't have gone to college otherwise, but also stronger connections to work and engage as employers. Yeah, also great stuff around public benefits access that we're doing here too, that we hope other states will follow on. Like reconnect, like having people recognize that like, low income people go to college too. So that, you could be someone who is leveraging CalWORKs and go to college. Like they're not different populations of people. So that's the work that we're thinking a lot about. I know we're at time, so thank you guys. I feel like this went by so fast. We'll follow up with an email with a lot of the stuff we shared. If you have more questions, feel free to reach out. Always happy to chat, of course. Thank you.
Such a great conversation. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Dave. Glad you were here.